If you like my content, you can go to my YouTube page and click the join button. And for as little as 99 cents a month, you can become a member. If you're a member, you get access to beautiful little emojis on live stream. And you will also get a little jester hat next to your name. You can also support me on Patreon for only $5 a month, uh, which would be very helpful. It's helping me upgrade my equipment and such. All right. So this next one here is called Why Did America Fight the Vietnam War? And let's see.
The Vietnam War lasted 10 years, cost America 58,000 lives, and over $1 trillion adjusted for inflation. It brought down a president, stirred social unrest, and ended in defeat. No one in hindsight believes fighting a losing war is ever worth the cost.
Yeah, I'm with him so far. Definitely did bring down a president, definitely did cause social unrest, and definitely ended in a defeat. Okay. Hey, if we just keep talking about it this way, I'm on board. Okay, let's see what he does.
Consequently, the Vietnam War is usually written off as a colossal strategic blunder and a humanitarian disaster. Yet historical appraisals might have been much different had the Vietnam War followed the pattern of the Korean War, which the United States fought for almost identical reasons, the defense of freedom in Asia. The U.S. had military advisors in Vietnam.
No. Okay, the United States didn't fight the Korean War for defense of freedom in America in Asia. It was to protect American empire essentially, and to ensure that the Soviet Union and communists didn't have increased influence in Asia. Not about freedom not about freedom in Asia. Just look at who they installed as a dictator of South Korea. That was not a freedom thing. Okay, that is a complete lie. 100% not true. Yeah.
During the 1950s, but didn't become involved in a major way until 1963.
That's debatable. They were involved. They were involved. They actually, yeah. Okay.
President John F. Kennedy firmly believed in the domino effect, the foreign
Hmm.
policy theory that vulnerable nations without help would fall one after another, like dominoes, to external communist aggression. Kennedy thus hoped to stop Soviet and Chinese-backed communist invasions in the manner President Harry Truman had in Korea by taking a stand in Vietnam. As with Korea, was a war the United States did not seek. As with
Okay. I'm going to start by talking about something real fast here. Uh, Vietnam, before there was a North and South Vietnam, had been under the occupation of the French as part of the French colonial empire. They were to them, this war was about national liberation. It was a war for freedom from colonial overlords. Ho Chi Minh and stuff were viewed as sort of like George Washington type figures fighting for freedom from colonial overlords. And the South was sort of propped up by the West in order to prevent complete and utter decolonization there. Um, so, yeah, okay, yeah. And by the way, the Vietnamese actually defeated the French at a battle called Dien Bien Phu, where they pushed out the French colonial empire, and then America comes in, and Ho Chi Minh was begging America, please help us with our independence. He actually really respected America, and he viewed it as a nation fighting for the freedom of peoples. He was wrong about that, unfortunately, and he begged America for help. America did not help him. Okay, they sought America backed the French. They backed colonialism still within Vietnam. All right. So the United States did seek conflict. They were trying to keep Vietnam as part of this sort of colonial possession. Okay.
Korea, Vietnam presented no imperial advantages, no natural resources, or resources of any kind that the United States needed to protect or wished to obtain. As with Korea, the aggressor was a communist government.
Yeah, so, okay, there is some truth in that. There weren't necessarily vital resources in those locations. But again, that kind of shows that this was mainly about empire and power, right? It was sort of a conflict between two empires, almost three empires, Soviet Union, China, and America, okay, trying to maintain their imperial possessions and their control over these regions.
In the North, intent on taking control of the South, and its military crossed an internationally recognized border to do so.
Uh, after the South had actually, as part of the peace agreement, the South had agreed to hold free and fair elections, including allowing the communists to be on the ballot. They did not. They broke that promise, and it was because of that that the North invaded, because the promise had been broken to hold free and fair elections for the Vietnamese people.
Following Kennedy's assassination in November of 1963, President Lyndon Johnson vastly escalated America's role in 1964. But even as he did so, Johnson prosecuted the war with deep ambivalence, authorizing significantly more troops and money for the war, but never pushing for total victory.
Part of the reason for that, folks, is that if you guys ever heard of the Pentagon Papers, America basically at this point already knew that they couldn't win. But none of these presidents, that they were going to be defeated. They simply could not win. The only way to really win would have been to exterminate every Vietnamese person. I'm not joking, because the communists are very popular. But none of these presidents wanted to end the war, because that would have made them appear to be the president that lost the war. So they had no problem sending in thousands of American troops to die. They had no problem killing thousands of Vietnamese people for this political purpose, even though it was already very clear that America would not be able to win the war.
In contrast, the North Vietnamese never wavered. They ignored every one of Johnson's many offers to negotiate a settlement.
Because they were winning. They were winning. Okay. They had no reason to accept his offers. They were winning.
By 1971, the war was at a stalemate, neither side able to establish a clear advantage. The President, Richard Nixon, pursued a two-pronged strategy: to turn over combat operations to the South Vietnamese and to bomb North Vietnam. The effort brought the Communists to the Paris peace talks, and by 1973 the North agreed to a general settlement, establishing...
Oh, they're missing a lot there, like the illegal bombing. First of all, the mass murder that this bombing did, fire bombing, mass swaths of rainforest with napalm, bombing population centers, killing thousands of civilians. How much you want to bet, folks? We're not even going to mention the My Lai massacre. Not only that, Henry Kissinger, who right now is burning in hell, promoted the bombing of the neighboring countries, which were not involved in the war, Laos and Cambodia, illegally bombing those countries in order to stop North Vietnamese troops and such from coming down into South Vietnam. Many war crimes committed, many other atrocities committed there. Okay. And I'm not saying that the North was perfect. They massacred a lot of people. But my point being here that, they're skipping a lot of stuff that went on here. And by the way, another thing that America did that they didn't even mention is that they set up these fortified settlements in an effort to prevent the Vietnamese from joining the communists. And they basically took people away from their farms and forced them to live in these camps away from their farms. And what do you expect to happen there? People weren't getting food, things like that. So America did nothing but make the population of Vietnam hate them even more and want to side with the communists even more. It was an endless cycle, and it was impossible. They couldn't have possibly won. Then I mean, the America just made it so wouldn't have ever won. There was too much popularity amongst the communists.
Two autonomous Vietnamese nations, one communist, one non-communist, in the manner of North and South Korea. However, the Watergate scandal, the subsequent resignation of President Nixon, and the Democrats' sweeping congressional victory in the 1974 midterm election all helped to convince the North Vietnamese that America would not enforce the peace agreement.
Yeah. Yeah. By the way, it is thought, now this is debated historically, do not take my word on this. There are a lot of historians have different views on this. Nixon, in an effort to win his election, was likely in communication with the North, telling them to not end the war until he was elected, because then he would give them a greater deal. And he wanted to do that because he wanted to make Johnson look bad. And then on top of that, he wanted to be able to take the credit once he was elected, but of course he reneged on that. If that's in fact what happened, there is debate on this. Don't take my word on that, because Nixon was a monster, obviously. And yeah, and he didn't enforce the peace deal. So okay, we'll continue.
Right. Without U.S. air support and material aid, the South Vietnamese had no chance against the North. Well supplied by...
And yet, folks, America had no chance against the North at this point. Okay. Well, like I said, during the Pentagon Papers, it was revealed that for many presidential administrations, it was already acknowledged that America wouldn't be able to win the war. for a number of reasons. Not mentioning the fact that people in Vietnam didn't like them. A lot of people didn't like them. Some did. Um,
By the Soviet Union and the Chinese, the communists gained full control over the country in April 1975.
Mhm.
The war proved far more costly than Korea because the geography and landscapes of Vietnam were far more conducive to insurgency operations.
Yeah, which made it so that the Americans lost. Okay, the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese military were very competent. It was their country, and they had a lot of popular support. So
There were also far more restrictions placed on American commanders than during the Korean War. In the United States in the
I like how that's sort of a criticism. First of all, barely. There were barely restrictions put on U.S. commanders. Again, mass fire bombings, murder of vast numbers of civilians. But yeah, there may have been some restrictions, but that was to prevent war crimes and mass death, though I doubt that really was something that was restricted. Um, and he's been like, yeah, well, the United States was restricted, so that's why they lost. Well, yeah, maybe they were restricted from doing war crimes. Okay.
1960s was a far less conservative and cohesive country than America than
Far less conservative and cohesive country. Okay, I don't even need to comment on
the
that.
1950s. Yet despite the long ordeal and terrible cost, South Vietnam was saved in 1973, only to be lost in 1975. The U.S. defeat in Vietnam was a political choice, not a military.
All right, so as part of my live streams, I kind of level up like a Pokemon. All right, as I get super chats, I put on Jester hat, Jester collar, and during this live stream, I did in fact make it all the way to putting on makeup because of the generous donations of the people watching me. Just for the folks watching this on YouTube, I just want you to know that so you don't think I've lost my mind midway through doing this. All right, I will now finish the video. Let's get it going.
Had the U.S. protected
So that's a lie. Historians would agree that it was a military defeat. It was also a political necessity, but it was largely a military defeat as well.
Had the U.S. protected an independent but vulnerable South Vietnam in 1973 and 4, that country would have most likely followed the model of
No, so South Vietnam was extremely corrupt. There was a lot of corruption there. By the way, the United States supported the overthrow of a few governments that they thought weren't keeping South Korea strong enough, which just further destabilized it. South Korea was not really a functioning state, which is why, as soon as the United States left, the North was able to just take over it.
South Korea. Millions of Southeast Asians would not have become boat people and refugees or have been sent to the gulags and re-education camps.
So this, just to let you all know, after this North Vietnamese took over South Vietnam, there were very few reprisals. I'm not joking. Look it up. They did send people to re-education camps, obviously horrific, but you would expect there was all this fear that the North Vietnamese would start massacring civilians and stuff. They actually didn't. They actually didn't. Okay, which is actually really was not expected, and I would have expected they would. They did not, but they did send some people to re-education camps. Um,
A viable U.S.-backed democratic Vietnam would have stabilized the region and almost certainly prevented the neighboring Cambodian genocide, in which one-fifth of that country.
Again, we bombed Cambodia during the war, which also massively destabilized it. So that is a complete oversimplification of Pol Pot and what happened in Cambodia. That was also partially the result of the United States. And also, by the way, the Vietnamese actually ended up invading Cambodia to get rid of Pol Pot, along with China and such. So they partially ended the genocide as well. So to blame that on the Vietnamese is just wrong.
2 million people were slaughtered by its communist leadership, and much of the
Mm.
bitterness over the war on both sides of the American political spectrum still with us.
That is true, though I will say the North Vietnamese regime did slaughter a lot of their own civilians, in a number of different ways during the war and after the war, but it wasn't yeah, okay.
Today would have vanished. And for the communist Vietnamese, the instigators and aggressors of the terrible conflict, what was it all for?
Again, folks, who were the instigators? Remember I said that Vietnam was seeking independence from their colonial overlords. To me, colonialism is an aggression, obviously. So, yeah, that's not true regarding who the aggressors were, or at least I should say it's much more complicated than that.
Today, ironically, the Vietnamese government aspires to nothing more than the capitalist affluence that it once reviled. I'm Victor Davis Hanson of the Hoover Institution for Prager University.
Okay, another nonsense video with nonsense history in it. Okay, folks.